My name is Margaret Whitfield and I'm 71 years old. I was born in Melbourne in 1952, and I've seen enough of life to know that some wounds cut so deep they reshape your entire world. This is a story I've kept buried for nearly a decade, but some truths demand to be told. It was a grey Tuesday morning in March 2014 when Emma appeared on my doorstep. I was 62 then, still grieving my husband Harold's passing 2 years earlier, still trying to navigate the hollow spaces he'd left behind in our old Victorian house in Brighton. Emma stood there with 2 battered suitcases and my 11-year-old grandson Oliver beside her. The boy clutched a threadbare teddy bear, the same one he'd had since he was 3, and his green eyes, so much like his father's, were wide with confusion. "He's your problem now," Emma said, not even looking at Oliver as she spoke. Her voice was flat, final. "I can't handle him anymore. Marcus and I are starting fresh in Queensland. My son James had been dead for only 6 months. A car accident on the M1. Gone in an instant, leaving behind a son who worshipped him and a wife who, apparently, saw that son as nothing more than an inconvenience." Oliver stood there in his wrinkled school uniform, and I watched his small face crumble as his mother turned away without so much as a goodbye hug. She was choosing her new boyfriend, some bloke named Marcus who didn't want children around, over her own flesh and blood. Something fierce and protective surged through me then, an instinct I hadn't felt since raising my own children decades ago. "Come on, love," I whispered, wrapping my arms around his trembling shoulders. "Let's get you inside." Those first weeks were the hardest of my life, and I'd buried a husband and a son. Oliver barely spoke. He'd sit at the breakfast table, picking at his toast, staring out the window as if waiting for Emma to change her mind and come back for him. The silence in the house was deafening. Not the comfortable quiet I'd grown accustomed to in my widowhood, but the suffocating silence of a child's broken heart. The nightmares were the worst part. He'd wake up screaming, calling for his mum, and I'd rush to his room to find him sitting up in bed, tears streaming down his face. "She's coming back, isn't she, Grandma Maggie?" He'd ask, and I'd hold him until the trembling stopped, making promises I wasn't sure I could keep. "Things will get better, sweetheart," I'd whisper. "I promise you that much." But honestly, I was terrified. At 62, suddenly responsible for an 11-year-old boy again, I felt completely out of my depth. The world had changed so much since I'd raised James. There were computers now, mobile phones, social media. Things I barely understood, let alone knew how to navigate as a guardian. But Oliver needed stability. He needed love. He needed someone who wouldn't abandon him when life got difficult. So we began, slowly and painfully, to build something new together. I enrolled Oliver at the local primary school and established routines. Homework at the kitchen table, stories before bed, weekend trips to the library. Gradually, microscopic pieces of the boy I remembered from family gatherings began to resurface. Oliver was brilliant. Not just smart, brilliant. While other children his age were obsessed with video games and cartoons, Oliver was fascinated by how things worked. He'd take apart old radios and televisions I'd find at garage sales, spreading the components across newspapers on the dining room table, like a surgeon performing an operation. "Grandma Maggie, look what I made," he'd say, his eyes lighting up for the first time in months, as he showed me some contraption he'd assembled from spare parts. He'd explain circuits and programming concepts that went completely over my head, but I listened. I encouraged him. I bought him every science kit and computer book I could afford on my pension, watching his confidence slowly rebuild itself. The years passed, and Oliver grew from a broken little boy into a determined teenager. But he never stopped asking the questions that cut me to the bone. Why did she leave me? Grandma, wasn't I good enough? Emma never called. Never sent a birthday card. Never acknowledged that she had a son who missed her desperately despite everything she'd done. It was as if Oliver had ceased to exist the moment she walked away from my front door. I watched him check the mailbox hopefully for years, only to walk back inside with slumped shoulders and fresh disappointment etched on his face. Something beautiful was happening alongside the pain, though. Oliver was channeling his hurt into purpose. I converted the garage into a makeshift workshop for him, and he spent hours there building computers from scratch and teaching himself programming languages. By 15, he was earning money fixing neighbors' computers and designing websites for local businesses. "I'm going to be successful, Grandma," he told me one evening as we sat on the back porch watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. "Really successful. And when I am, She'll see what she threw away. I saw the fire in his eyes. Not just ambition, but something deeper and more dangerous. A need to prove his worth to the woman who had deemed him worthless. It worried me and inspired me in equal measure. At 18, Oliver received a full scholarship to study computer science at Melbourne University. I cried for an hour after he told me, overwhelmed with pride and the bitter knowledge that James would never see his son achieve such heights. But I also knew this was just the beginning of something much bigger. The abandoned little boy was becoming a man with a mission, and Emma had no idea what was coming. University transformed Oliver in ways I never expected. While other students partied and enjoyed their freedom, Oliver spent nights in the computer lab developing algorithms and building applications that professors called revolutionary. He'd call me every Sunday, his voice filled with excitement about breakthrough after breakthrough. "I'm working on something big, Grandma," he said during one of our weekly calls in his third year. "Something that's going to change everything." But then, Oliver had developed data prediction software that could analyze market trends with unprecedented accuracy. Tech companies started taking notice, and by 21, he'd dropped out of university to focus on his startup full-time. He named it Whitfield Analytics. "Why Whitfield?" I asked during one of his visits home. "Because you're the only family that ever mattered," he said, hugging me tight. "You raised me. You believed in me. This success belongs to both of us." The company exploded overnight. Within 2 years, major corporations were paying millions for Oliver's software. He moved to Sydney, bought a penthouse overlooking the harbour, and at 25, Forbes listed him as one of Australia's youngest tech millionaires. But success hadn't softened the edges of his pain. If anything, it had sharpened his focus on the woman who had abandoned him. "I hired a private investigator," he told me during Christmas dinner at his new home, the city lights twinkling like stars beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Oliver. She's living in a run-down flat in Brisbane. Marcus left her 3 years ago for someone younger. She's working at a call center, struggling to pay rent." I saw something cold flicker in his eyes that reminded me of those early days when he'd stare out my window, waiting for her return. "What are you planning, love?" "Justice, Grandma. Pure justice." The plan Oliver unveiled was both brilliant and ruthless. Through a series of strategic business moves, he'd discovered that Emma's call center was owned by a larger company that used his software. He maneuvered himself into a position where he could influence her employment. But he didn't fire her. That would have been too simple. Instead, he arranged for Emma to be promoted to a better position at the company's Melbourne branch. She had no idea her son was behind the opportunity. Then Oliver bought the building where she'd be working. He renovated the top floor into a stunning office space and moved Whitfield Analytics headquarters there. "She'll be working 3 floors below me every day," he explained, his voice eerily calm. "She'll see my name on the building directory, see the company cars, hear people talking about the young CEO upstairs. But she won't know it's me until I'm ready." The day came 6 months later. Oliver had arranged for Emma to deliver some documents to his office personally. I was there that afternoon, having lunch with my grandson in his corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, when his assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Whitfield, Emma Richardson is here with the quarterly reports." Oliver's hands trembled slightly. The first crack in his composed facade I'd seen in years. "Send her in." Emma walked through those glass doors looking older, tired. Her once vibrant blonde hair was now streaked with gray, and she wore a cheap business suit that hung awkwardly on her diminished frame. She carried herself with the defeated posture of someone life had systematically beaten down. Her eyes swept the luxurious office, the awards on the walls, the expensive furniture, the view that cost more per month than she probably earned in a year. Then she saw Oliver behind the massive mahogany desk, and her face went white. "Hello, Mum," he said quietly, not standing up. "It's been 14 years. Emma's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, the documents scattered from her shaking hands onto the marble floor. "Oliver, but how? This is your company, Whitfield Analytics. Worth about 200 million now." His voice was steady, professional. "I named it after the woman who actually raised me. You remember Grandma Maggie, don't you? She's here today." Emma's eyes found me sitting in the corner, and I saw a recognition dawn along with something that might have been shame. "You left him," I said simply. "An 11-year-old boy who had just lost his father. You chose a man over your own child." The silence stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Emma began crying then, ugly, desperate sobs that echoed off the glass walls. I was scared. I didn't know how to handle everything after James died. "You were 32, Oliver said coldly. I was 11. Who needed handling more? What happened next surprised me. Instead of the crushing verbal assault I expected, Oliver stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the city he now partially owned. "I used to wonder," he said softly, "what I'd say to you if I ever saw you again. I imagined this moment 1,000 times." He turned back to face his mother, and for just an instant, I saw the little boy with the teddy bear flickering behind the successful man's mask. "But now that you're here, I realize something. I don't need your apology. I don't need your explanation. I needed you when I was that scared kid standing on Grandma's porch, and you weren't there." Emma's sobs grew louder. The woman who mattered. Who fed me, who helped with homework, who held me when I had nightmares, who believed in me when nobody else would. She's sitting right there. He nodded toward me. "You're just a stranger who happens to share my DNA." Emma resigned the next day. I heard later that she'd moved back to Brisbane, though Oliver never spoke of her again. We had Sunday dinners every week at his penthouse, just the two of us, looking out at the harbor and talking about everything except the woman who had brought us together through abandonment. Sometimes I'd catch him staring out at the water with that familiar, distant look, and I'd know he was thinking about her. But the anger had gone out of it somehow. Seeing her broken and diminished had given him what he'd been searching for all those years. Not revenge, but closure. "You know what the funny thing is, Grandma?" he said one evening as we watched the sunset paint the harbor gold. "What's that, love?" She was right about one thing. Marcus didn't want children around, but neither did she, apparently. It just took her a while to figure it out. He reached over and squeezed my hand. "Thank goodness for that," he said. "Otherwise, I never would have learned what real family looks like." And in that moment, I understood that sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the most devastating losses. Emma's abandonment had brought Oliver to me, and me to him, at exactly the moment we both needed saving.